cameraman has to catch up. But I will tell you this much. Am I okay? All right. She may not give advertisement to herself and to this wonderful project in Walton, but I will tell you that we've been through Gaines Tavern, and it's wonderful. Connie has done so much work. It's so much organization. And they've got some teas, ladies' teas coming up. I couldn't resist. I bought some tickets to the tea and hope to go and wear my hat. I have a special Christmas hat, Connie. In December, the 13th and 14th. So ladies, put that on your calendar. This is a beautiful ceremony, putting on this tea, and Evelyn Haynes is so involved in that. You probably all know Evelyn. She's been to some of our meetings. But anyway, I'll tell you about Connie and then hope that she gives plugs for the remaining events in this year that are going on, other things besides the teas. She's a lifelong resident of Walton, and she's a widow, and I knew her husband, Jerry. I don't think I've ever told you this, but I used to work for the City of Florence, and Jerry was a police officer, and he'd come in from time to time, and I had the privilege of meeting him several times. Wonderful guy, wonderful guy. And then you all had 3 wonderful children, Kyle and Kara and Katie, and now she's a grandma. Yeah, grandmother of 4. And so I'm sure she's as proud of her grandchildren as could be. And she said she's currently in her 20th year of working for the City of Walton. By the way, Walton owns the Gaines Tavern History Center. And it's not often you see a city actually own the museum or the historic places, so that's kind of an oddity in itself. And she's also worked for the Walton Verona Board of Education and the Boone County Recorder, which is a very important newspaper in this neck of the woods. She's a member, of course, of the Friends of Gaines Tavern, and she's on the board of directors. And she's become very intrigued with the history, and she's done so much historical research and gathered so much information that she's discovered that the historic marker has some errors in it. And that's not one of our historic markers. That's not one that the Historical Society, that one was there when we started our historic marker project. But that just goes to show you how important it is to research all these things and get all the facts before you commit them to bronze. And she's also in charge of tourism for Gaines Tavern. And this year thus far, they've had visitors from California to Massachusetts. And they average 20 to 30 guests for every event or every time they're open. And they've actually had 2 of Abner Gaines' great-great-great-grandsons arrive from Texas. And these 2 people had never met each other before until this event that Connie coordinated and put on at the Gaines Tavern. It was called the Gaines Family Reunion. And she contacted all the descendants. I just can't believe, that's a magnificent project. Thank you for doing that. Thank you from Boone County. So now without further ado, let me have Connie Goins come to the podium and tell us all about the Gaines Tavern History Center.
Well, thank you for having me. I have thoroughly enjoyed doing the research on the Gaines Tavern. When the city purchased the house in 2006, Mayor Terzop said, I need you to find out all you can about these people. So it got me started looking. And I have worked pretty much since 2006 on finding out information. And I was really surprised what there is out there on the internet, and was able to do quite a bit of research. But I'm not going to talk so much about the family tonight as I am going to talk about the Gaines house itself. The house, we're celebrating its 200th anniversary this year. Different people are going, are you sure it's 200 years old? Well, no, not completely sure. But from documents with deeds and property transfers and whatever, we've been able to determine that the house itself was built probably between 1810 and 1815. But since Abner actually was deeded the property properly in 1813, we figure the house was probably built then after he secured ownership of the property. So beginning, the city purchased the house in 2006. Let me get to it. You can see what it looked like when we purchased it. Of course, the house has been through many owners, but the longest owner was Mr. John Galt. He bought the house in 1937 and lived there for 53 years. And over that period of time, he amassed a great collection of antiques. And if you were around here back in the 80s or late 80s, he had a 2-week auction selling off his collection. So it was quite a big event in Boone County at the time. But we started in 2006 with the purchase of the Gaines Tavern from Alan and Stephanie Jurdy, who had purchased the house from Mr. Galt in 2009, or in 1990. The reason the city purchased the house was basically 3 reasons. It was for the long-term preservation of a historic landmark, actually to educate the locals and visitors about transportation and local history, and to promote tourism. We kind of take it for granted, Walton being on the Dixie Highway and the old Lexington Pike, you know, you pass it all the time, but you don't really realize what has passed there in all those years. So it really gave us a lot to think about. So the first ideal was to preserve a historic landmark. So over the 200-year history of the house, it has become a landmark on the old Lexington Pike or US 25 when you go by. I know as a child, I used to ride my bike out Old Nicholson Road, and Mr. Galt had the haunted house on his mailbox, and I used to fly by that house. I was afraid. I thought it might be haunted. So it was quite fun as a kid. But he also, like I said, he had his antique business there for years, so it was a landmark back in the day. And also, the house stood along, like I said, the old US 20, or the old Lexington Pike that went from Covington to Lexington. And the house stood there 50 years before the trains started going through. So now the trains pass behind and in front of the historic landmark. We have the Southern Railroad that crosses in front, and we have the L&N, or the CSX, that passes in the back. A lot of small towns look forward or would love to have tourism, and the city is very fortunate that we do have the Gaines Tavern now to try to revitalize tourism to our area. And after a couple of years of trying to get the name out there, things are starting to happen at the Gaines House. We've been opening regularly on the first and third Sundays, May through September, since 2012. And as Betsy mentioned, we used to have maybe 5 or 6 people come. We're up to 20 to 30 in opening. And people are driving from up in Ohio and from Lexington and Georgetown to come and visit the house. Every now and then we'll have a phone call from somebody that's just come into the area and just wanted to know if they could see the house. So we call one of the volunteers and they go out there and show the house, and it generally generates a nice little donation when we do that little step. So to make things happen for the city to purchase the Gaines house, we had to secure funding. The house was discovered for sale by the Kentucky Historic Preservation Group, and they approached the city with possibly buying the house. The sale price of the house was over $300,000, and there were definitely things that the city would have to do to even make the house safe for people to go into if we were to ever open it. So the house, or the city, secured a grant from the Kentucky Transportation Enhancement Program for $300,000, and the city added $75,000 to that amount for the total purchase price of it was $325,000, and then the city had then an additional $50,000 to work on restoration. So the first things that we had to do was to work on the wiring, the heating and air conditioning system, and the west wall of the north parlor was coming in from water deteriorating, getting inside the brick, and it was starting to collapse. So the first thing that the city had to do was to go inside and remove the floor from the north parlor. And if you see in the pictures, you can see the dirt underneath in that first picture. So that was completely removed, and they figured the damage to that flooring, because that was the only floor that we have restored in the house. Everything else is original, with the exception of the back kitchen, or it was a bedroom at one time, and it was the Galt's kitchen. It's now our bathroom, but that floor has been replaced. But at one time in the early 1900s, the house was actually used as a barn, because no one was living in it at the time, and apparently they kept the animals in the north parlor. And also in that north parlor, the windows on the west side of the house had been bricked in. And so that was opened back up, and the windows were rebuilt, and they matched the symmetry and size of the windows in the front of the house. Another thing that had to be done was an addition of a bathroom had to be removed to restore the historical integrity of the house. At some point in the history of the home, in the back part they call the L, and there's like a basement, and they had put in a toilet and a bathtub and a shower. Well, in the mid-'80s, as the Galt family, had their second generation, I guess you want to say, decided to install more modern bathrooms. And so the section that you see there that looks pretty dilapidated, that we're getting ready to tear off at that point, those house 2 bathrooms and a laundry room. But that was taken down, and some more window work and door work had to be done. I mentioned in just this spring, the city did put in a handicapped accessible restroom for the convenience and use of the people who come to the house. So this enables us to have more events like the teas and special things that we do. During the outside renovation, it was discovered that many of the bricks were very fragile and needed to be replaced. So you couldn't just replace them with any brick. We had to find bricks that were made back in the 1800s. And where the stucco had been applied to the house, when we were starting to remove that, it was damaging the brick also. So during this process, there was over 1,000 brick that needed to be replaced. and the cost of these bricks was $112 each. So by the time we had finished with this phase of the property, we were in, it was $114,000 for brick alone. So it was quite a tedious undertaking, but Maxwell Construction, they're out of Indiana, they're restoration specialists. They did a fabulous job in the work that they did in putting things back together. And at the back of the house, when I mentioned the L, there were two porches, one for the second story and of course one for the first level that attached the back to the front of the house. And those had to be completely removed and rebuilt. So by the time we finished this phase of the work, we had spent another $200,000 on the property. So if you're doing your math, we're already, over $700,000 into the house at this point. So we moved our work inside in 2011. So if you notice in these pictures, you can see, I know here in the brown paint, you can see the broken or the cracked plaster, layers of paint and chipping plaster and things. The entire house was in this shape. Some of you may have visited the house right after the city purchased it. In the north parlor, there were no ceilings in either of the two front rooms. They had come down while they were doing electrical work and whatever, and they just didn't get them back up. So we ended up having to go in and do all that work, but it has definitely been a labor of love, and the people that have been involved in getting that done. Mayor Carlisle was the mayor at the time when we did the plaster work, so all of the walls in the house have been replastered and restored, so you can definitely see how fresh and new everything looks inside. But the main thing that was done was that we did maintain the historical nature of all of the woodwork, and everything is still intact. Very little has been replaced with the exception of the floor and maybe some baseboards along the way, but most everything has been restored. So before I go into our tour, does anybody have any questions or anything that you might be curious about? Okay. Well, I'm going to do a little tour of the house. The house itself is really rich with architectural treasures. Original trim and door hardware remain in use today. When you approach the house, the entrance detail to pay attention to is the 6-panel front door with the fan, the detailed fan lights, and the fluted trim. That was all there, and it's still original to the house. All of these older homes have a grand entrance, and right now we have our entrance set up as an information and gift center. We found that to be quite beneficial. The case there has artifacts from when they did the archaeological dig in 2007. And so people now actually pay attention to those artifacts. When we had them displayed otherwise, I think they kind of got glanced over, but now they come in and look and are really intrigued with the treasures that was found. And if you'll notice in the bottom picture there, that's the inside of the door, the major lock casing and the doorknob and everything. All of the outside doors, with the exception of one in the very back, has the original metal work and doorknobs and everything, which I just find that amazing that they've lasted or made it this far. So like many homes of the day, they have the grand staircase. They're most people are just very intrigued with, looking up, because it actually is a 3-story staircase. And if you'll notice, the scrolling in the woodwork there, that is all along the staircase, all the way up to the 3rd floor. And the baluster is cherry, and the spindles up to from the 2nd and 3rd floor are the original cherry. But the spindles that you can see closer to the main floor were probably replaced at some point with tiger maple, but they're absolutely beautiful. This is pictures of the north parlor now that it's been redone. We have this room set up as the Gaines family room. We have information about the Gaines family, and we just, want to share that information. One of the main features of that room, you'll notice, is the fireplace and the arched cupboard. Now, the fireplace, we're very certain, is original to the house. And flanking on both sides, there are little closets. Now, our young little guides just love to tell us about the slaves that had to hide out in there, But I don't think the slaves hid in there. I think that was where they kept wood or, their gun or something maybe. But the girls just love to tell those stories. And because the architecture of that day was always symmetrical, the arched cupboard, we believe, was placed there maybe by Mr. Galt. Might be one of his finds and his antiquing that he put in there, because there's not one on the other side. And as we go into the other rooms, you'll notice that everything's generally pretty even. So then as you climb this, got something showing up there. As you climb the stairs to the 2nd floor, you'll notice when you're going through the house that you just kind of glide up the stairs. They're not deep, tall stairs. They're just very easy to go up and down, and it's not tiring to make several trips up and down those steps a day, which, we find we do that a lot when we're touring the house. And you can actually see at the very top up there the cherry newels posts that drop there. And I just think it's very lovely, the detail that, still there, that we haven't lost that in being able to take care or fixing up the house. And also that 2nd landing there is big enough for a small sitting room. And that's just, on the 2nd floor landing. Okay. Okay, there we go. This suite of rooms is off to the left of that 2nd floor landing. Now this suite of rooms has been, I don't want to say updated, but it was decorated by the Jurdy family while they were there. They call this Susanna's Suite. This suite of rooms is actually 3 rooms. They have the main room there with the beds in it. There's a small dressing room off the back of that. And then there was another small room that they converted into a more up-to-date yet not modern bathroom. Everybody just loves that tub. It's zinc that's in there. And then they've used a dresser and a vessel type sink. So it's really lovely the way they have it decorated. And a lot of people really do enjoy that suite. So once you exit that room and you continue upstairs, you will go to the 3rd floor. And this, there again is another landing that can be used as a small sitting room. But when you go into the doors on either side, you enter the attic area. And I find the attic probably the most fascinating place to me in the house. The wood, the pegs that have put that wood together. I mean, it looks like it was just put up there yesterday. And I'm always amazed. It's never dusty. I never notice cobwebs. It just always looks nice. So it's, really interesting. And probably back in the tavern days when Abner was running his stagecoach and they were pretty busy, I would imagine that they probably used these areas as sleeping areas also if they, should be busy. Because we still haven't determined how long Abner's family actually stayed in the house. Still trying to find that out. It's a mystery to me. So, but it's been, very interesting doing this study on that and trying to make the connections. So as we leave the attic area, we're going to go back downstairs and we're going to visit the room on the right of the landing. And on the study I've done on these homes, a lot of times when they're built in the style this house is, there's a large room on the second floor that would be considered the party or ballroom. And I kind of think that's what this room was, but we have it set up as a bedroom. And the bed that you're looking at in that picture was gifted to us this year by the Acree family. And it's pretty as close to period furniture as we're going to get in the house, I believe. It's an 1800s half-teaster bed, and it just looks beautiful in the room. So, and there's one interesting side note about this room is it's the only room in the house with a painted floor. Now, there are stories and documented in Boone County Recorder of a party that had taken place in this house when it was under the ownership of Elijah Smith Clarkson, who was a doctor at the time. And his family lived in the house for 14 years. And during this party, there was a stabbing, and the young man died who was stabbed. If you'll come to our haunted history walk, you'll get the rest of the story. But that floor is painted, and I just kind of feel it was painted when we got the house. And I just kind of feel like they were trying to cover up something. So, so we repainted it since it was already painted. But that's quite an interesting story on that. As you exit the rear of that bedroom, you go down, it looks like 4 steps into another large room. Again, this could be sleeping area or whatever, but you notice again that there's the fireplace. There's a fireplace and mantle in every room, and the detail in the L, or the addition, is not quite as significant as it is in the original house. But we have this room set up like a sewing room, a textile room. And then off the rear of that room, we go into another small room. And again, if you notice in the picture there on the top left, that the carving is very similar on that mantle as it is in the rooms downstairs. And this room also has stairways that goes back downstairs. But then off to the rear of that room is yet another small room. And if you'll notice, it's papered and whatever, and the Jurdies use that as one of their children's bedrooms. And we believe that that room was built even later than the L. It was part of the porch that connected the rooms, and it was closed in to make an additional room. So as you go down the rear steps, you will enter into the back room, and we call this room the Galt family room. When Mr. and Mrs. Galt had the house and their vast collection of antiques, they could have, out of a 13-room house, they could only live in 3 rooms. They had the living room, a kitchen, and a bedroom. The rest of the house was full of antiques, high, low, everywhere. I have pictures that Johnny Galt, the grandson of Mr. Galt, has given me of the house, and they just didn't have room to move. I said, your grandmother was a very special woman to live in all this. He goes, oh yes, she was. He goes, but she would love to live in this house like it is today. So we take that as a compliment. But he's given me an idea of what the living room was set up like when his family was there. So we're working on coming up with furnishings similar to what he's described to me, and we're going to set that up as their family room. Then as you're going back towards the front of the house, you go through double doors, and this room was converted into the modern kitchen for the Jurdy family. So it's the room we use to set up our teas. And again, if you notice in the one picture, the elaborate fireplace again. The mantles are just gorgeous. And the detail of the door on the side matches the detail of the front door with the fan light above. And we kind of believe that this door may have been, when the stagecoach was running and whatever, that this may have been the entrance to what was the tavern at the time. Because there was an old stone step outside that door before we put the ramp and porch in. And it looked like it had been used quite a bit. And we just feel like that may have been the entrance to the tavern at the time. So as you come out of that room, that was the kitchen, we come now into the south parlor. And I had mentioned to you that the symmetry is a very important detail of a house of this period. You can see that in this room. On both sides of the fireplace, it's flanked by two very nice sized cupboards. And we have this room set up as a tavern room with information that I've found of stories of people who actually stayed at the Crossroads Tavern. They have written about it in their journals, and I was lucky enough to stumble across some of that information on the internet. Love the internet. And so I'm able to, substantiate, yes, this is what was going on with the house at the time. So as you make your way out of that room, then you return back to the front entrance. So I hope that you all will have the opportunity to come out and see the Gaines house. The pictures don't nearly speak of its beauty. It's really more beautiful than the pictures show. And we still, as far as the Friends of Gaines Tavern, we still have things we'd like to do. We're still looking for more period furniture. Coming by it is just really hard, but you figure it stood for 200 years, so we can have 200 years worth of various articles of furnishings in the house. But the main thing we want to do is tell the most complete story that we can about the house, where it's standing, and the history that has passed by it as it has stood there. And an opportunity that you do have this Saturday is our last opening of the house for the season. And it's our Pioneer Day. We'll have vendors on site, and you can tour the house. And we'll also have birthday cake for the celebration. I don't know if you're interested. I have history of the property owners up to a point. I don't want to take too much time, or shall I move on? Move on? Okay. Well, the history of the land, and this isn't a complete, I have the complete, I just haven't put it on this tape or this presentation yet. The property has passed through quite a few hands over its 200 years. And doing the history, you make connections with the people that you know about. So the very first known person that we knew who owned the land was Levi and Jane Todd. They were the grandparents of Mary Todd Lincoln. And they were also, he was the founding father of Lexington, Kentucky. He was an attorney. In fact, their home still, it is a museum in Lexington today. And I need to go there now that I've made this connection. But Mr. Todd, he was a farmer and an attorney. And he did a lot of legal work for Revolutionary War soldiers. Well, if they did not have money to pay, a lot of times he acquired part of their land grant. And we believe that that's how he acquired this property to begin with. So in December of 1801, Archibald Reed purchased 300 acres from the Todds, and there he established a distillery and a tavern house on the main road from Georgetown to Cincinnati. So I know somewhere in Boone County's history, Archibald Reed is credited for having the first distillery and in Boone County, which, so that's quite interesting. Then 5 years later, Mr. Reed sold 200 acres to a Caleb Summers. Now, there's not a lot of information on Caleb Summers in Boone County, but if it's the same Caleb Summers that I found more information on in Maryland in the early days, he was kind of coming to Kentucky to escape his past. He got into money trouble here, and I understand why after connecting with the Caleb Summers that I found in Delaware, Maryland. So, but anyway, Mr. Summers then owned the property. And then after that, once he got into financial trouble, he ended up having to sell the property, and Thomas Kennedy bought it for $412 for the entire 200 acres. And in doing the research, found out that this Mr. Kennedy was the same Thomas Kennedy who owned the property where Covington now sits. He sold that property to the founding fathers of Covington. So he, again, had a lot of land in northern Kentucky. And another connection, the Southgates of Covington, Thomas Kennedy's daughter married into the Southgate family, and they have a pretty rich history in northern Kentucky. So it's been really fun. And actually, the Southgate summer home is in Walton, and it is occupied by people who live right there on Main Street. There's a very large white house across from the Dairy Delight. If you ever go through Walton, you can't see it very well. That's the Southgate summer home. So you'll have to check that out. But anyway, Abner Gaines is coming into the scene at this point, and it says he actually shows up in the census records living in Woodford County in 1800. I'm going to give you another little interesting thing I found while doing all this research. It said Abner Gaines was born in Orange County, Virginia. Do you know what Kentucky was back in the early 1700s? Orange County, Virginia. And so, from Orange County, Virginia came Kentucky County, Virginia. And from Kentucky County, Virginia, this part was Fayette County. So when Abner Gaines was in Woodford County, he could have very well been in Boone County then, because Boone County came out of Woodford County. So it's really, we think he came from far away, maybe not. So that's been really interesting, putting that together. And I'm just going to put this question out there. His wife was Elizabeth Matthews, and her family was from Moffitt's Branch, Virginia. There's no longer a Moffitt's Branch, Virginia, but the people who have done research on the Gaines family and the Matthews family feel like they had to be close neighbors because Abner's sister married a Matthews. Well, there is a Moffett Road in Kenton County, which used to be Campbell County, and of course Boone County was Campbell County also. So I'm kind of thinking Moffitt's Branch might have been right over there at Moffett Road. Does anybody know? Done that kind of research? It's when I really wished I had time to do digging. I would love to find that out, make that connection and find out where they really were. But anyway,
How come his son's last name was Pollard?
that's his middle name, John Pollard Gaines.
Okay.
Yes. Susan and Elizabeth, they had the 13 children, and Abner was quite a prominent figure in early local government. He started as a justice of the peace. He became the sheriff. He was the sheriff for a few years. That was quite colorful in his history. I'll let you do some digging on that one. But he was involved in local politics. Now his oldest son, James Matthews Gaines, he was appointed the postmaster of Gaines Crossroads in 1815. Now again, we kind of feel like at this point the house had been built and it was used as a public house, as it is referred to in some of the writings that I have found of people who stayed at a public house 15 miles from Cincinnati. You know, main road between Cincinnati and Georgia, had to have been the Gaines house. So I'm not sure even, you know, they were probably living there, but I don't know how long they stayed. Then Abner's second son was John Pollard Gaines, and he was an attorney or lawyer who practiced in Walton. And he also was a soldier in the War of 1812, where he was captured. He was a major, and he was held in Encarnacion in January of 1847. And of course, this was in Mexico City. But while he was being held captive, he was elected to Congress, the 30th Congress, in March of 1847, and held that office till 1849. Then Zachary Taylor appointed him as the territorial governor of Oregon. So of the Gaines siblings, he's probably the most famous, I guess you would say, as far as his political standings are and working, you know, for the public and whatever. But he went to Oregon in 1850, and he remained there until his death. And at this point, that's the end of our program. But there are definitely more stories to tell. Yes,
How much debt is hanging over the property today?
please.
How much debt is hanging over the property?
Well, it's all paid for. There is no debt.
Where'd all the money come from for renovation?
The renovations came from donations, city funds.
75.
Of course, the Kentucky Transportation Cabinet granted us, you know, the $300,000 that got us started. And the city has just worked it in their budget to be able to maintain and, you know, keep it up. I said, we as the Gaines, Friends of Gaines Tavern, since we have made such an investment in this property, we're trying to make it worthwhile for the city to have. And I think we're on the right path. People are finding out about us. Like, it just tickles me to death when I get a phone call from somebody that's visiting from California or New York, and they've read about the house and they want to see it. I mean, that's really exciting to me, and I'm so thankful that we have volunteers that I can say, can you hold on a minute? And I get on another line and say, I got somebody who wants to see the house, can you show it? You know, and they'll go out and show the house, and the people are just really impressed. I mean, we've even had a repeat customer from California. He came, he was on business, he likes to tour old homes. He came and looked at it, loved it, had family in Louisville. The next time he was in town, he brought the family from Louisville up to see the house. So, you know, it's word of mouth is really helping our cause, and since people seem to have an interest in it, we really feel like we're on the right track. So we do try to have events that are interesting. Coming up, the rest of, for the rest of this year, the Boone County Library puts on the Haunted History Tour. Last year, in the one night we had over 150 guests. We've opened it to 2 nights this year, and we're selling tickets now. We've already started selling them. It's real interesting. The stories we tell are true and documented. Not the scary stuff, but historical things that have happened, the tragedies that have happened in connection with the house. And then the tea that Betsy mentioned, we found that this is probably one of our biggest fundraisers. We started, the first tea we did was a Mother's Day tea, and people were disappointed they didn't get to come, so we thought, well, we'll try to have one around Christmas and decorate the house. Well, that was even more popular than the Mother's Day tea, so we're actually have 2 dates. We're sold out on Sunday, December the 14th, and we do have probably about 25 tickets left for the Saturday tea. If you're interested, call City Hall and we'll put you down. But this is, we all volunteer, we make the food, we donate our time, our product, and all of the money goes back to the house. So we have some projects that are on a need-to-do basis. We have got to get shades on the windows to protect the furnishings. With the house sitting the way it does, we get the morning sun and the afternoon sun, and it comes right in those windows, and it's cooking our furnishings. We've got to get that taken care of. So that's, in fact, friends are meeting tonight, and that's what they're talking about, is we've got to get these shades in. And, things like that. We want, people have been very generous with donating furnishings for the house to us, and we need to be able to protect those, because once they're gone, they're gone. We won't be able to get them back. Yes, ma'am.
Have you been able to find any actual Gaines family pieces?
Family pieces? No.
The furnishings?
The house has been through so many hands. The house, the Gaines Tavern, sold out of the family in 1832. And that's when Dr. Elijah Smith Clarkson purchased the house. And actually Benjamin Pollard Gaines, one of Abner's younger sons, owned the house at the time. He bought it, well, he bought it in 1832. In 1840, I've got it in my paperwork. But anyway, that's when Dr. Clarkson went into it. And the Gaines family were land speculators, and several of the sons had gone to Arkansas and started buying up Arkansas before it was even a state, and where they were raising cotton. And Benjamin had run onto some hard times in Arkansas, and he had to make money. So Dr. Clarkson was a family friend, and he purchased the property, and he lived there for 14 years. So when they left and went to Missouri. So, all those furnishings went. And the interesting thing in the wills of the people, there's not really lots of things that are being left. It's just necessities. It's an elaborate home, but I think it was sparsely furnished. I just find that interesting. You just think this big, gorgeous home, I bet it had, it really didn't. They had their beds, they had a few chairs, they had a table, they had some eating utensils and farm equipment is what was being willed and passed down in the families. So, it's lovely to dream the big southern, plantation, but it really, that was not the case. They were well-to-do, but not in movie form.
Well, sometimes when the house becomes known, then, people say, I think my grandmother had something that came from there.
Yeah.
Sometimes they show up.
To the best of my knowledge, there was nothing. I'll be honest with you, this is my take on it, and I think with the research I've done, I honestly don't believe the family lived there all that long. I believe they were living somewhere else, and this was the family business. Because when Abner died in 1839, he left his part of the Gaines Crossroads to the rest of the family. And they were not, this house is not where he died. He died over in Richwood. So this was the family business. They all had an interest in what was going on there. So when it sold out of the family, when Dr. Clarkson bought it, that was the end of the Gaines era. And I have a feeling everything that was Gaines was gone at that time. And the Gaineses, the biggest part of the family, went to Arkansas. They're more famous in Arkansas than they are in Kentucky. The three of the sons settled Little Rock and Hot Springs. There's a hotel I've been invited to visit that one of the sons built there in Hot Springs. It's still standing. So, yeah. Yes, ma'am.
This is a half a step off, but there were a lot of Gaines who owned property in Boone County. On Botts Lane, I know, and Idlewild, I know. Do you know if a group of Abner's brothers came with him, or do you think that's part of the 13 children?
No, it's not part of the 13 children. The people who were settled in Boone County were cousins of Abner's. I've actually been able, there's a lot of genealogy on the Gaineses. The hard part of it is, and it's very tedious to keep it all straight, they named all their children after each other. And I'm like, give me a break. I mean, there's an Abner, it was Abner the dad and Abner the son. Abner the son never married. So there are, if there's an Abner Gaines after the second generation, it was a grandson of Abner. It was not, of one of his other children. And Susan and Elizabeth, my goodness, there's an Elizabeth Gaines, at least 3 of them in every generation. It's really hard, to keep track of them. Now, the one daughter who did stay in this area, she married a Bush. Now, if you have family that's in this area, the Bushes and the Hubbles, and that is Abner's descendants to his daughter. But his sons all went somewhere else, with the exception of Augustus, and I think he stayed here in Boone County. And I think James Matthews even ended up somewhere else. I know he the one, was it James or Richard? James stayed here, yeah. So, but most of them all left and went somewhere else, and it generally was in Arkansas. So, but they were cousins of Abner, So, yes, ma'am.
Well, this isn't a question, but when I was 10, and there was the first Boone County Historical Society in Florence, and they met up on Main Street in the old 2-story log building there. And anyway, I don't know if there's anyone in here who would even remember a gentleman. He was quite a historian. His name was Lucian Bradford. And about a month ago, and I'm so mad at myself because I didn't bring it tonight, but about a month ago, I found where he had presented at that time to the Historical Society the history of the building.
Oh, really?
Yes, and so I will.
I would love
I'll
see that.
I want to keep the one I
Oh,
have.
yeah.
But I will gladly make you a copy
I
and
would
give
love
it
to
to
have
you.
that. I said, it's just really been fun. I know I'm taking your time, but when we were getting into this, we had, Mr. Todd sold it to Mr. Reed. Mr. Reed sold it to Mr., Abner, Mr. Summers, and then, how it all, in the beginning, And then at the end, we knew Mr. Galt had it, but we didn't know when he bought it. And Mr. Galt had one son, and Mr. Galt's son had 2 children. Well, by the time I get into this, Johnny Galt Jr. is gone. He's deceased. And I mean, like I said, I was a child when Mr. Galt had the house. I was afraid of it because he said it was haunted. So I never hung around there very much. I just always remember it. But then his grandson, I finally made contact with. And he has come back to the house, and he's been able to give lots of information about when his grandfather lived there. And a lot of the stories that everybody loves to tell came from his grandfather. He was a storyteller, but of course that made his business more interesting if he had these stories to tell when people would come to the house. But he said, you know, as far as the ghosts, he's never seen ghosts, he's never experienced anything. But he's been really good to help me with, you know, from 1937, you know, to now. But I had a gap. And so Asa's sitting here, and he had his son Mills do deed search for me. And he filled in the gaps. And that, I mean, the stories on the people in the gaps are as interesting as what happened in the early days and, you know, what's happened, happened here in the more near, history, I don't want to say. Yes, I can't even think, I've got so much going on in my head. But it's just, you just get caught up in it. And one of the ladies interviewed, she goes, when are you going to write a book? I said, I don't think I could get my head straight to get it all in there. But there's so much information. And I mean, people, relatives of the people that these stories are about, I know are still around. And I would just love, to meet them and substantiate, some of the stuff that I've read, may or may not be true, So it's become a labor of love and fascination. Unfortunately, I know more about the Gaines family than I know about my own. I really need to start doing some research on my family.